right, everybody. So in this video, we're going to be talking about limitations of the Minleon permanent lighting system. Every system has its own limitations, so you just need to understand them. That's the most confusing thing when you install multiple systems, is to understand, oh, these are the limitations of this system, this is the limitation of another system. So I like using Minleon because it's so universal. It works for residential, it works for commercial, and I only have to know and memorize one set of limitations. So first set of limitations is the controller itself, okay? So this controller, how many lights can it control? Individually control, right? Which means that if I were to run lights out of this, and go out, how far could I send that and still be able to tell the lights what to do? And the answer is 1,024 lights, okay? Now there has been a recent firmware update in the last week that Minleon has done something that I kind of requested previously, but it's also something that I think they were working on regardless. And it's to make these be able to control even more lights. Now it's not individually controllable, and I'll kind of explain that in briefly, because it's not that important. But you can now go out this and go 1,024, and then here's a second leg here, and you can go 1,024 that way. Now typically when you go through like a basic T, the pattern will flow up through here, or we'll say through here, and it'll flow this direction and it'll flow that direction, right? So if I were to do something like this and have the controller set here, and then I want to go this way and that way, this building behind me, the pattern would flow that way. That's not what we want, right? I mean, that typically doesn't look great. And most of the time things aren't as symmetrical as this. This one, it probably wouldn't look terrible, but typically left to right or right to left. It's just more beautiful. So that's just something you want to think about. But like I said, in that particular case, if you were to go out in both directions, there is a way in the firmware now to make the left side flow left to right, or the right side flow right to left. You can change the direction of each side. So you can basically put this in the middle and then put lights over off to the left, lights off to the right, make this one flow this direction, make this one flow this direction, it'll flow both ways. Now, this left side and right side, they just mimic one another. So understand, it's not perfectly individually controllable, but what it is it's going to allow a seamless flow across everything. So that way the pattern does not break, the effect does not break in the middle. So that's a nice way to get 2,048 lights controlled in a single line, okay? And nearly individual controllable, but like I said, it only looks that way, it really isn't. So that's one thing to look at. But that controls all these lights, right? That controls them down a long line. And you can put spacers between them. That doesn't affect the actual light count, okay? But your limit is 1,024. Now, light control is only one limitation, but we've just gone over. That's how it works. Hopefully you guys can review this video and understand that very clearly, that 1,024 or 2,024 or 2,048, I guess, would be the maximum limit of essential, controllability in a single line. And I'll give you an example. So there was a church that we did 1,200 feet on it, and we only used one controller, and it's because there was 3 places where we used the T and we dropped down to an awning, okay, to continue lights around the awning, 3 different awnings. And so there's over 300 feet in awnings. So realistically, it was only 900 feet of controllability plus 3 awnings, which would duplicate addresses or whatever. Okay. So there's that. So does that mean that, like, if I hook a power supply up to this, all of a sudden I can light up 1,024 lights? No. Limitation number 2 is power. Okay? Power supplies need to follow UL listing. All the Minleon stuff is UL rated. Okay? So this one, if you can read it, it says 4.17 amps. That's 100 watts. So this will power 200 lights. It actually powers 200 lights, okay? Now, we have a 5 amp power supply that will power 250 lights, okay? And it looks just like this. All it says is 5 amps on it. So understand there's 2 different power supplies. The ones that come in the control box, they are typically the 4.17 power supplies, unless requested otherwise. But typically they're 4.17 power supplies. And the 5 amp ones, you know, I do use those almost exclusively for my own business, just because it's one less thing I have to think about for limitations. But okay, so 250 lights. So what happens if I want more than 200 lights? Like, my controller can control, you know, 1024 lights. Why can't I go further, or how do I make it go further? Well, there are things called power tees and power injections, and you will have to inject power, because even though the signal goes through, we need to repower that controller, okay? And or power those lights. We need to inject power so that all the next set of lights will have power, up to 200, 250, depending on the power supply. So it really goes off in sections. You have a section of 200 lights or whatever with the controller, and you've got like a power tee, and then either you inject power through the power tee or somewhere else or whatever. And then the next section is 200, 250 lights, and the next section is 200, 250 lights. But every time you need to inject power, which requires a new power supply and a new 110 outlet, okay, to hook that power supply to. So that's how you build these systems really big. Just think about them in sections, but don't ever exceed a certain section of 200, 250 lights. All right. Now, a hard cap limitation, 250 feet. Now, what does that mean? There are spacer cables, and we're going to talk about limitation of signal through spacer cables next, but there are spacer cables that they're just like jumper wire, right? Like, just like when you do temporary lights. Let's say I've got lights, but I need to jump from this point all the way up to this point. Well, I don't want lights running through there. You'll see that. That doesn't look good, right? So I'm going to put a jumper wire all the way from here to there. Okay. If that's over, you know, a certain amount of footage, that's going to be a problem for losing signal. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is total footage. So when I've got the lights, understand that 250 feet is the maximum. I would not exceed 250 feet. That includes spacer cable and lights. There is power dissipation through these wires. These wires are 20 gauge wires, which are very thin. So at some point, you just run out of voltage, okay? It gets dissipated through the line. So whether there's lights or it's just a straight line of cable, you're going to run out of voltage. It's just going to slowly trickle off, okay? And so if you're ever concerned after you've installed a job, like, did I exceed it? I didn't really count this. First thing I do after I install every job, turn it to the bright white setting, right? So cool white, I think is what they call it on the app. But turn it to the pure white, really super bright white, and see what happens. If you're low on voltage, what you're gonna notice is all the lights look perfect until the very end. The very end, it starts trickling off, and you start seeing it gets a little more yellow, and a little more yellow, and a little more, and eventually it'll turn red if you went way too far, okay? And then maybe it doesn't even light up some lights afterwards. But the point is, you'll see it dropping off, and you'll understand that it's like, I'm low on voltage. Okay, I exceeded something. Either I put 210 lights on there, and I was only supposed to put 200, or I exceeded 250 total feet, okay? Don't exceed 250 total feet. And again, it's very important to test it with the bright white setting, the cool white, because if you do warm white, it doesn't use as much voltage. So it'll look perfect a lot of times with warm white, right? But then when you use cool white, which pulls the most amount of power of any color, then you're gonna notice the last 7 or 8 lights start trickling down and start turning yellowish. So it's a good tip. All right, so let's talk about spacer cable. And by the way, just to reiterate that point, 250 feet is a hard cap, regardless of a 5 amp power supply or a 4.17, okay? 200 lights is all that a power supply can handle for a 4.17. If you want more of that 250 feet to be lights, then you're gonna need the 5 amp power supply, okay? So that's all the 5 amp does. Doesn't let it go any further. It just lets you control more lights further out of that 250 total length. All right, spacer cable. So when you jump, again, the maximum jump length between each light should never exceed 20 feet. Now, Minleon's recommendation is 17 is their maximum length, but I do 20 feet all the time. I've never had a problem. And I would do 20 feet as far as a straight cable, not ones that have connections in between. That eats away at the connection as well. So let's talk about that. Here are the lights, right? So this is like a light cable. Every light is exactly like 1 foot apart. Now you can get other versions that are 6 inches apart. But the point is, when signal comes into this line, comes through the cable, and it goes to this light, right? And this light basically takes that, puts out the color that it's told to do, and then it understands what the next light is supposed to do and stuff like that. It resends the signal out. Now this is a 4-wire, which means it has 2 signal wires, okay? So it'll send the signal out 2 lines to go to the next light. That distance in between is the maximum that I'm talking about, no more than 20 feet. Now, whenever it's just lights, of course, it's less than a foot. That's never gonna be a condition, okay? But understand the 4-wire technology is because sometimes these connectors, let's say there's 4 pins. Maybe one of the pins gets lost, right? Like maybe like it just doesn't make a good connection. So from one light to the next light, it's only 5 volts. It's hard to get, it's hard to travel along those distances. What they found with 3-wire technologies is that, when the signal gets lost, everything beyond that stops working. And it happens a lot because it's only 5 volts instead of like the lights, which are 24 volts. So the signal goes through a little easier. So this bulb will throw out a crappy signal. Let's say we got a signal that ended up not being so clean on one of the lines. It'll say, disregard this one, use this strong signal, send out 2 fresh signals. Okay? And so it always sends 2 fresh signals. So you'd have to have both signal lines mess up to not get the signal to go out correctly from each light. So it's just a redundancy thing. But that being said, it's a foot apart, right? I mean, every time it resends that signal, it re-energizes, recreates that signal, and sends it to the next thing. So when you're doing, you've got, let's grab this real quick. So you've got this, it's coming out. Let's say now I need to add a jumper cable to this, right? Great. Add a jumper cable and go straight out. You can go up to 20 feet and then you can put more lights and stuff again, right? And you don't have to worry about anything. That's not a problem. Where it becomes more of a problem, and understand that this is the hardest concept to understand about everything, is spacer cables, because T's play an effect. There are data boosters and stuff like that. But let's say we jump, 20 feet and then we add another, 5-foot cable on here, and now we're at like 25 feet or whatever, right? That's too much. It's not something I would install in a house, because even if it works right when I'm there, I know it's going to cause problems. It could cause it to be glitchy and you might see some flashing. It can cause it to not react, and let's say I put it on Christmas lights and then all of a sudden the top strand just stayed white and never did anything, right? For whatever, because it was just too far, that jump was. So there are data boosters. Now data boosters look like just a single pebble. You basically put them right at the end. So there's a light here. You need to be within 5 feet of that light. You put a data booster sender here, okay? And then you go through all this spacer cable, right? And then on the other end of the spacer cable, after it's gone here to here, and on the other end, you put a receiver on this end, okay? So this data sender changes the language, sends it through here, gets it to go a long ways, and then it receives that signal and converts it back to normal signal that the lights can understand. So then you just connect the lights to here after the data receiver. And again, the receiver should be within 5 feet of the next light, okay? I only use the 2-piece data sender receivers. I think they've been tested, tried and true. There is a 1-piece, but it's brand new. I don't like new technology. I think that you're gonna find faults and stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But ultimately, I'm not really recommending the single piece. The single piece will allow you to just put it right at the start, and then you can jump up to 60 feet afterwards. But the 2-piece, you can go up to 200 feet. Now again, if you remember one of our previous limitations, that's going to put you really close to 250 total feet length, right? Which means that even if all you had was 20 feet of lights before that, you're going to have to inject power right at the end of the 200 feet. So understand that jumps come at a, you still have a limitation of power in addition to limitation of the signal. There's that. Okay. Last bit of information is with a T. So let's say that you have power coming in here and you have signal coming in here, right? And it splits off. what happens to the signal going through a T? Well, the easiest way to understand that is understand that like power and signal come up here, power comes out, signal, 50% of the signal goes this way, 50% goes that way, okay? So if you thought you were gonna jump 20 feet, drop it down, okay? You just went through a T, it's now 10 feet. And the worst part, you can't put a data sender here and then a data receiver up here, a data receiver here, or something like that. You can't do that. Don't put signal boosters going through T's. They just don't work. T's and power T's will lose the signal going through them, okay? When you're using a data booster. So it'll drop it down to like normal signal or whatever, but it reduces it to a point that it's just not worth trying to ever put a data sender before a T. So what happens if it's like, well, I have to go to a T, I need to go off to the left side here, and then I need to go up to the second level, but it's way over here, it's like 25 more feet away. Well, unfortunately, you need to put a data sender here and a data boost or a data receiver over here. But keep in mind, you're sending 50% signal here, right? I mean, you've already basically gone 10 feet. That violates the condition of saying, put that sender within 5 feet of the last bulb, right? So if it's only got 10 feet to go left, I mean, you can basically say, I've lost 10 feet. I've lost half my signal, right? So I can't put a data signal. So what happens? You have to put a single bulb, okay? This will recreate the signal. So let's just say this is a single bulb. Now this strand here is obviously longer than a single, but you put a single bulb there, then you put a sender, okay? And then you put a receiver on the other end. Now, this light will shine, right? So we don't want that. Spray it with Flex Seal, it'll black it out. But what it does is it recreates that signal right after here. It gives a brand new strong signal. Now you can jump 20 feet from that point. But if you need to go 25, 30 feet, at that point, put a data sender, put a data receiver. But yeah, you need something to actually create that signal within 5 feet of that actual data sender receiver. So that's the hardest concept of everything to understand. And it only really matters when using T's or trying to jump signal right after a T or a power T. So do understand that those are the only things that, I mean, if you understand that concept, the rest of the stuff is simple. I really encourage you to understand the limitations to a very finite level. Watch the video several times. This is something that, it's not difficult to understand, but it is something that is definitely, the stronger you have of concept of it, the stronger you understand the concepts, everything becomes easy to design later. Lastly, the hardest thing in this entire system to understand is going to be power injections. I have a different video about power injections. I explain them. There's so many different ways that you can do it. That's what makes Minleon so universal, so great for commercial buildings. But that is also another concept that you really want to understand. If you're doing residential, you're not going to run into too many power injections. You have to go over 250 feet before you ever really need to ever think about a power injection. And most residential isn't going to go over that. Maybe 1 in 10 you'll have a job that wants a complete wrap around the house or something like that. But realistically, you're usually under that 250 foot mark, so you won't see too many power injections. So I'm not going to go over limitations of power injections and how to do them and stuff in this video. But like I said, that concept I was just showing you with the power signal and then the T's and stuff, that's one of the hardest concepts. It's kind of advanced. And then power injections, they start off very simple, but the more you kind of like utilize and kind of extract the different ways that you can inject power, that's probably the hardest concept for everybody to understand. It's the one that everybody tends to have difficulty and contacts me, even 20 jobs down the road where they're like, can I do this? Or how would you do this? Or how do I get that? So do understand that if you get these concepts down, there's nothing really else that is going to send you for a trick or anything like that. All right. We're always around, so if you ever need anybody's advice or whatever, you can reach out to me. Join the Christmas Light Contractors group if you aren't already, or join Vibrant Nights. We talk about things there. Both of those places are great resources to understand more about permanent lighting in general, as well as Minleon permanent lighting.